Welcome to Living the Smarter Science of Slim, where we provide a scientifically proven lifestyle for long-term health and fat loss by eating more and exercising less, but smarter.
Eat smarter, exercise smarter, live better. I am so ready for that.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another bonus Smarter Science of Slim podcast. Very, very excited about today's guest. He is an individual who, man, I tell you, if there were more people like this, I think we would be we'd be in a really good place. He is a super intelligent and passionate guy who's thinking outside of the box, but also working on the inside of the system, which is really important. He studied at MIT, chemical engineer, and then went on, he's a very, very lazy guy, went on to get his MD, and now he is an assistant professor and practicing physician at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, where he specializes in cancer research, does a bunch of oncology work, and in his copious amounts of free time, he also has the wonderful blog, CavemanDoctor.com, where he applies simple logic to complex health issues. Dr. Colin Champ, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. Really, really thrilled to be here.
Well, Colin, before we dig into cancer and protein, one of which is one of my favorite topics, another one which makes me sad, and you can probably guess which one, is how did you went the quote-unquote traditional route, and then you were disappointed with what you found, and you decided to venture out a bit on your own. Can you tell us a bit about that story?
Sure. When I started medical school, I assumed I would be a orthopedic surgeon or pediatrician, primarily because those are the only two physicians that I encountered in my life, so I assumed that's just what I would go into. I went away from that. I got into the cancer field. I love, as weird as it sounds, I love the field of cancer. It's the patients are amazing. They're great. They just want to get better, and it's a very rewarding job. But I was very much into nutrition, diet, and exercise during my college years, and I really got away from that during med school because what worked for me and what worked for my clients in the gym was vastly different than what I was taught in medical school. So I kind of went away from that. It really just left a lot of confusion in my head, went into the cancer world, and then brought me right back. There's just such an integral link between diet, exercise, staying slim, and cancer. So the two really go hand in hand.
And Colin, what were those biggest disconnects you saw between your actual experience, both personally and professionally, as well as your underlying understanding of biology and how cancer works, and what you were being taught to teach people in terms of diet and exercise? What were the biggest areas of discrepancy there?
Well, through my own self-experiments and through like my clients in the gym and my friends in college and beyond, I found that minimizing carbohydrates was a quick way to gain weight, which meant eating more fat, potentially eating more protein. And I also found that chronic type exercise, pounding of the joints, long distance running, those kind of things more often ended up in injury as opposed to health. Yet when I went through medical school, it was a lot of very anti-fat message. All fat was really bad for you. All fat led to everything from gaining fat to diabetes to cancer. And carbohydrates were the key, whether that be grains, wheat, pasta, even white bread. And we pushed more of a jogging type message in college as well. A lot of chronic exercises. And it just didn't really jive with what I personally knew and what I knew from my friends. So then I was, like I said, I kind of wasn't sure which way to go, because you assume what you're taught in medical school is the ultimate in what's right. And it's nice. People like you out there and others are kind of dispelling those myths that we're taught in medical school. So I think now we're hitting a point where we're kind of righting our wrongs.
Certainly promising news. And Colin, one thing I wanted to dig into specifically with you, because you are uniquely qualified to talk about this as a practicing oncologist and someone who I believe, based on your very nice picture on your website, you graduated from medical school fairly in the relatively recent past, and therefore are up on the most recent research. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's correct.
or it's just that this lifestyle has been so good to you that you just have you just look really, really young. So not that I am very old myself, but anyway, people like to talk about fat and protein, and when we talk about caveman, paleo, ancestral lifestyles, and then sometimes people who may be less friendly to that lifestyle play a quote unquote trump card, which is that's fine. Protein causes cancer. And we have definitive studies that show that protein causes cancer. And to the extent that you can eliminate protein from your diet, you will eliminate your chance of getting cancer. Do you have anything to add to that conversation?
Yeah, I think like all things in life, it's a balance. If you're not eating one thing, you're eating something else. So it's always a question of what is that something else. I heard a very prominent cancer researcher, one of the most prominent cancer researchers in the U.S. He runs a major cancer center, giving a talk on this, and someone asked him a similar question, and he basically said, in terms of evidence of different foods that cause cancer, the question is, does carbohydrates? Yes, very much. Does protein? Yes, maybe not as much, but yes. And then does fat? No. So taking those three things into consideration, everyone has to eat all three of those macronutrients. So I don't think any diet that eliminates any one of those in its entirety is going to 100% guarantee you're not going to get cancer. And in terms of what the data actually shows is if you're going to minimize one of the three, I think carbohydrates would take a larger stand than protein per se, and definitely than fat.
And what is the underlying, the science in quotations that sometimes is thrown out in terms of protein is like, well, it triggers IGF-1 and that causes cancer to grow. So can you go a couple clicks deeper as to explain why carbohydrate may be the most offensive and fat is the least and protein is in the middle?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. The stimulating the IGF pathway, the insulin pathway it's an anabolic process, which is why protein's great in that regard, because you eat protein, you get bigger muscles. It's anabolic as opposed to catabolic, which breaks down muscle. But anything that stimulates cellular growth and anything that's anabolic can also stimulate cancer, whether that's going to stimulate cell growth. Anytime cells are growing, a little too much growth is basically cancer, which is happening all the time in everyone. And usually we fix the problem. Sometimes we don't. So looking at a polarized view at the IGF pathway, carbohydrates stimulate that quite a bit more than protein, which is interesting because a lot of pushback I get with my dietary recommendations, people always bring up, well, protein causes cancer. And these are generally groups that are pushing a high carbohydrate diet. So I think carbohydrates are a little more stimulating in that regard. The other pathway is not to get too science heavy here, is mTOR. And this is a pathway where we have $100,000 drugs that we attempt to block this pathway. And that is a pathway that protein can stimulate as well. So these are reasons why you may not want to go too overboard on the protein. And then also what really set protein and cancer causing on the map was a lot of the casein studies by Colin Campbell. And casein's a protein found in milk. And he found that, on the surface, he found that a high casein diet in individuals exposed to a toxin of the liver caused liver cancer. Now, this is not a very straightforward study. And some of the rats got low protein in the beginning, high protein at the end. Some of the rats got high protein at the beginning and low protein at the end. So it's very contrived. And it is important to note that those rats that got low protein died a lot more than the high protein rats. So once again, it leaves my head spinning. I don't know, maybe high protein causes cancer more, but if it causes more death, do we actually want that?
And well, Colin, and that's one of the, again, I'm not an MD nor a PhD, so I don't want to oversimplify things due to my ignorance, but I've always seen when I read this research that protein is a little bit analogous to water. Like protein to your body is a little bit analogous to water to your garden, meaning like the more you water your garden, the more things are going to grow. And I say things like weeds could grow too. Like if weeds are in your garden and you water it more, it's going to grow more. But that doesn't mean the answer to having a beautiful garden is to stop watering it. And it seems like protein is the same way, both through the mTOR and IGF pathways, where protein stimulates growth. And if you eat it, stuff grows. The things that are already growing will grow faster. And if you don't eat it, you have sarcopenia and nothing grows and you can't move when you're 70. So is that a reasonable take on things?
I think that's a great take on things. Not only does it make things grow, but it helps to repair things that are broken, which you need to do to live a long and prosperous life.
And that's when it comes to a long and prosperous life. You mentioned the mTOR pathway, and I know there's actually a lot of really exciting research with the mTOR pathway and protein and the amino acid leucine, and just the idea of, you said, repair and the need for us to repair and to stimulate the ability for our body to generate new cells and to repair, and that only protein, and particularly specific amino acids, which are mostly found in animal sources of protein, facilitate that. Is that accurate?
I think that is accurate, and limiting exactly what you're getting at. Limiting protein could affect the entire garden, whereas there's other ways to prune those weeds out, and that's intense exercise, intermittent fasting, intermittent ketosis. There's other ways to stay healthy overall while getting rid of the weeds.
And that is that a more macro point? Because even we sometimes hear about a very high carbohydrate diet doing certain things, and if you provide your body with insufficient nutrition, like a slow march towards death is maybe not like it's slow, so it's going to slow everything. Like it's going to slow your mental function, it's going to slow the growth of cancer, but it just slows you down. It puts the brakes on your entire body. Is that a one way to think about it, or?
Yeah, that's what we have data in animals that shows that. The recent data in monkeys that's been published in Nature hasn't shown such a great correlation. But if we extrapolate from the animal data, yeah, if you severely calorie restrict yourself, less than 1,500 a day or so, and severely protein restrict yourself, you may live longer. And to each his own. It's not really the way I would like to live. If that's going to give me 6 months, you can have them.
Yeah, I forget who it was, but they said something like anyone who talks about adds years to the end of your life. Well, make sure you're not compromising that middle third of your life to get to live from 112 to 115. I'm not sure those last 3 years are going to be that good anyway.
Exactly.
Well, and Colin, what are your thoughts on, in a lot of these studies, especially the monkey studies you mentioned in caloric restriction, there's a false dichotomy placed upon diets that are high in plant-based, antitoxin-free, but high vitamin and mineral substances like vegetables and low fructose fruits. We're given a false dichotomy saying that if you eat nutrient-dense plant foods, you have to be a vegetarian and you can't eat animal foods, and versus an approach where you eat nutrient-dense animal foods and nutrient-dense plant foods, and how much of these like caloric restriction studies are really just because in one group they had more nutrient density. Like how much of it is attributable to the lack of calories versus the abundance of essential nutrients?
Oh, exactly. That's a great point. I actually published a paper on this same topic about 2 weeks ago. What you're getting at, there's such an issue with semantics right now within the whole calorie restriction community. I mean, what is calorie restriction? What are you actually restricting? If you look, there's studies at the turn of the century showing that if you calorically restrict mice, they will have a decreased incidence of cancer. But when you take a closer look, these mice are eating an 80% corn grain type diet. So it's a very poor diet to begin with. And when you're cutting 30% of that back, is it the calories or is it the poor source of carbohydrates that you're restricting? And if you look at one of the professors that did a lot of these studies, Tannenbaum, he actually wrote on this, and it's been lost in the cancer community, where he said the greatest decrease in incidence of cancer was not from restricting calories alone. It was only when you restricted carbohydrates and replaced them with fats. And so what's happening there is you're probably taking away a lot of these nutrient-sparse carbohydrate sources like corn or whatnot. You're exchanging them for more nutrient-dense sources, and exactly that. You're providing more vitamins. You're providing more other nutrients here. So this is where the water gets muddied very fast. There's so many things at play here. It's really hard to say what's going on. And every group with some sort of agenda says, oh, it's because of this, or it's because of this, or it's because of that.
And what have you seen, Dr. Champ? Because I've heard a lot of talk about promising research when an individual is in any phase of cancer treatment, and cancer's ability to grow or thrive on glucose versus on ketones. Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Sure. The metabolic difference between cancer cells and those of our normal cells is basically that whether oxygen is present or not, they rely on a process called glycolysis, which is conversion of sugar directly into energy. Whereas our normal cells, if there's no oxygen present, say if you're lifting weights or running sprints, you feel that burn, and that's basically glycolysis as well. It's turning sugar into lactic acid. But when oxygen's present, we have mitochondria, which are much, much, much more efficient in the process of glycolysis. And mitochondria can turn anything from sugar to fat to energy. And basically, one of the big differences between cancer cells and normal cells is they do not have this ability. So they need to rely on sugar. And we have a good way of exploiting this via what's called a PET scan, which is when we give radioactive sugar. You inject it into a cancer patient, and then you put them under a CT scan. And the cancer cells light up like Christmas lights because they take in so much sugar. So there's been a push, and this is actually nothing recent. It's been tried almost 50 years ago. But there's been a push to put people on what's called a ketogenic diet, which is basically a 80 to 90% fat diet, very minimal protein and even less carbohydrates. And this is a method of getting ketones out, which are sources that likely cancer cells cannot use, whereas normal cells can. And I've been open to this with my patients. I promote it via my website and I promote it via my talks, but it has not been proven yet in human patients. It's been shown in mice to have some amazing results, but it has not been proven yet. But an interesting tidbit, basically for patients that have brain tumors, the higher their blood sugar is, the worse they do, the shorter they live. And this is exactly hitting on what you said. The more sugar that's around, the more these cancer cells are going to feast on it. So I've had a handful of patients undergo a ketogenic diet, and interestingly enough, their blood glucose level drops on average below 90. So patients in the studies show that those with the blood glucose below 90 live the longest. So we're putting our patients in this category.
Fascinating. And certainly the idea of eating radioactive sugar is one that is interesting to me, because I'm curious if I could become a hyperactive superhero if I did that enough.
Unfortunately, it's very low radiation doses, so it's not turned anyone into a superhero as of yet.
Dang it.
We'll
See
keep
Spider-Man
trying.
just going crazy. Colin, what would be your prescription, forgive the pun, to someone who wanted to eat in a way that would minimize their likelihood of cancer while maximizing their quality of life right now? Because as we've talked about, those things might maybe be mutually exclusive.
I think saying exactly what I do, the prescription for myself, is keeping the amount of carbohydrates low, and by low I mean definitely lower than what our mainstream health resources have recommended. Keep those low. I think keeping the fat, the majority of my diet is fat. And then the middle ground is, as you pointed out, very nutrient dense green leafy vegetables and some berry type fruits. I think diet wise that makes sense. And then periodic intermittent fasting, I think, is a great way to prune out those weeds that you spoke of in our cells, to basically cause our cells to recycle some of the lesser needed parts. I think intermittent carbohydrate restriction, getting your body into ketosis in case there are any of those cancer cells in there that are going to thrive on sugar, it's a good way to starve them. And then another thing is just being very active overall, your baseline activity high, walking around a lot, and then having periodic intense, whether it's sprinting or lifting heavy weights. These are all ways to turn on a process called autophagy, which gets rid of those weeds in the cells.
Colin, last question is, how do you deal with this is what you do day in and day out, and it is not the party line. How do you continue to stream up current? Do you get tired? How does that work?
It's it's tough. There's a dichotomy right now between what you read on the internet and what you hear in the hospital. And, diet nutrition has not really been an integral part of medicine for the last 30 years or so. But people are willing to change. It's coming back. And as long as you say something and can support it with data, people can't argue. And it's also very nice too when you're the one making the data. So when I can say, this is what I did, this is my data, this is what it shows, argue with that, then people start listening. So I think a lot of these aspects of cancer care are going to start crossing party lines into the hospital setting.
Well, very, very exciting news. Colin, what's next for you?
I'm going to have a couple clinical trials I'm trying to get through. I'll continue to publish my work on diet and nutrition, and I should have my ketosis paper out soon for cancer patients that underwent a ketogenic diet during treatment for brain tumors.
Well, listeners, very, very exciting stuff. And as you can tell, Colin is busy at work, and let's do all that we can to support him. Check out his work. It's fabulous. His name is Colin Champ, MD, and you can read more about him at cavemandoctor.com. Colin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks a lot for having me. I really appreciate it.
Listeners, I hope you enjoyed today's show as much as I did, and please remember, this week and every week after, eat smarter, exercise smarter, and live better. Chat with you soon.
Wait, don't stop listening yet. If you like the podcast and if there's other ways we can help you, please join us in the Smarter Science of Slim support group, which is freely available at the Smarter Science of Slim website, smarterscienceofslim.com. There you'll find all kinds of free recipes and success stories and just all kinds of fun stuff, like how to help your kids go sane and just great community content.
And just one last thing before you go, if you wouldn't mind heading over to iTunes and up onto Amazon.com and leaving us a review, and then going over to Facebook and liking us, we would hugely appreciate it.